Hello, let's start a new React project together. So actually I just created the folder, my application, by running this command npx create react app, and I just passed the folder name that I want as a parameter. So I will not do this again because it takes a few minutes, but basically it just creates the default folders and the files that I need in the application, and it just downloads the dependent packages. And after doing that, I see some instructions here which basically suggest me to go inside the folder and start the application by running npm start command. So I'm already inside the folder now, inside my practice folder, and then what I'll do is I'll just run the npm start as suggested. After running these commands, I guess the application is starting. Yes, I can see on my browser. Let me move it here. It started on the default port, which is 300. And why I'm seeing this page? Because there are some files inside my folder. For example, under public, there is index.html, which is the entry page. And there are some other files like some images, some icons, and under the src there are some test files, javascript files. There are too many things, right? Whatever I don't need, I can just basically remove. But again, back to the original question, why I'm seeing such a page, this page. This is defined by the app.js file, which is here. So, for example, there is an image, there is a paragraph element, and there is a hyperlink here, right? With the learn React text. Let's see. Yeah, this is the image. There is the paragraph element, and then there is the hyperlink. So, for example, whenever I delete this image, what should happen now? Image is gone. So this is the very basic introduction of the React project, just creating the application and the fundamental files inside the template, which are index.html, app.js, and maybe index.js, but let's see them more in detail in the upcoming sections. Okay, now let's a little bit play around these files and let's add some elements. So let me bring my app back on the screen. So I cleaned up and there is nothing on the page right now. Inside body, there is nothing. But I can just start adding some elements. For example, let's just add a very basic paragraph element. This is a test paragraph. Okay. What happened now? The paragraph element is added on the page, right? So if I have only static elements, I I don't need to use React. I can just simply have an HTML file and that will be it. It will already work and it will do whatever I already need. But if I need some dynamic elements and maybe I need to run or execute some scripts and show the context dynamically depending on the result of or the return of those functions or the scripts, then at this point React is one of the best options that I can go with, right? So let's try to do something like that. For example, let's add another element, maybe a division now. Okay, and let's say this is my dynamic context. All right, is it here? It's here, but we will change it, right? So how we can do that is we have to map this context to a function. So how we do that is we have an index.js file. So here we will render the context from a function or a script that we define. So let's try to do that. From React DOM, we will render. Okay, and here what we can do is we can define the function we have, and then the return of this function will be rendered into what? Into the component we have on the page, right? So it will be get element. Did we have an ID on the element? Not really, but we can add, for example, let's say this div ID. This is, what was it? Dynamic context. Okay, very shortly, let me name as dynamic context DC. Of course, it's not a good naming, but just to save some time. So here, what I can do is I can get the element by ID because I just added an ID, right? But otherwise, I can get the element by any other attribute as well. That's also fine. But now, find the element by its ID, which was DC. Okay. Cool, I'm ready. And here, what I need is I'll just call the function. So my function can be, let's define a function which name can be, for example, return the dynamic context. But we don't have such a function yet, right? So let's try to define it first. And for that, of course, I can create another file as well, but I already have the app.js file. So let's define it here. And of course, to be able to use it in the other file, I have to export this, right? So let's export this. And then here I have to import and use. So when I add this, it will be automatically imported. Very cool. And we can discuss later why we need that, but we can add a capsulation here with React strict mode. React strict modes. Okay. We have to close this. Yes, okay. Now we are ready. So this means return dynamic context function will return some context and it will be rendered into the element whose ID is DC, this one. So normally I see this is my dynamic context, right? But now after I do this mapping, after this function, after this code, I will see the context of that element coming from this function. So let's see now what I have. I have nothing, right? Because I did not return anything. So let's try to return something. So normally what I expect, it was a division, right? So it should be a div component. And inside, let's try to do some just a text. This is a sample context. Very cool. Now I have this context coming from this function. So actually, let's change this div to a paragraph element. What happened now? My context is still there, right? So initially, I defined this DC component as a division, but even if I change in the function that I mapped, it still works. So this is why the dynamics context can perfectly work with React rendering function here. And what if I return more than one component? For example, I can have a list, right? List of items. So I can have several list items. But for now, let's try to return two paragraph elements. Like this, for example, this is another But somehow it already looks weird, right? There is a problem here. It is already warning me. Expects a parenthesis. Is that the problem? Let's try. Okay, let's edit here too. But no, this is not the problem, right? It didn't help me because I have to return only one component. But I want to return more than one element. So what I can do is a very basic trick, which is just wrap this component inside a division. Now, actually, this is a container which is only a single element inside which I have multiple components. So what I have now is I have two paragraph elements. Very cool. So even I can remove this div 2 if I don't want to have another extra container. Just return with an empty wrap, so it will still work, and this is called as a fragment for my React component. So we said that we want to work with dynamic context, right? So let's actually have some variables here. For example, this is my variable. There is some string inside. And if I want to show this variable instead of this static context, what we'll do now is I can see my variable as a string itself, because how can React understand if this is just a text or a variable name, right? So at this point we should use this as a JSX component, which means we have to just wrap with a curly braces. So in this case React framework can understand that this is a JSX coming from a variable, and even the color, the variable is highlighted with a different color, right? So let's see what happens now. Now I can see the value of this variable. So not only the variables, but also even other functions I can use, because if they are returning some React components, why not, right? They can be rendered. So let's try to do that. Instead of this static variable, just use, oops, relevant. Okay, okay, yes. So what happens now is only one text, because the other one, app, does not return anything. So let's try to add some returns here. And now it will return some string, which is app return. Okay, app return is here. And now we can even add some parameters here. So for example, let's say this is the user input. Okay. And again, since I'll use this as a variable, I have to wrap it as a JSX component, and I have to return it. So let's pass, let's set this argument from where I call the function. So it will be, for example, let's set it to something, and Very cool. I can see it here. And it does not have to be a primitive, but also it can be an object as well. For example, if there are two arguments, user input and I don't know, just user input two, very simply. Two. So what happens now is this time it will be an object, user options, let's say. And now I'm passing two arguments, right? The first one is the user input, the second one is the user I2. So user input from this object, the first one is user input, and then let's return both of them, for example, and then the second one will be user I2 from this arguments, right? Argument set. So from this set, first parsing the first and then the second argument. Is everything okay? Yes, everything is perfectly working as I expect. Because the first argument I set to I'm setting the return dynamically. And then the second I just set to number 2. Yes, very cool. And of course, I don't have to parse these arguments into different components. I can even return in the same context, right? Let's, for example, use string interpolation. So I need a backtick here. Let me find, okay, this. Dollars, where is it? It is here. And okay, and let's say something like this. Option 1. Is everything okay? Let's see. No, something is wrong here. Why? Because maybe I don't need a dollar here. Okay, and here actually I meant the first option, right? The first argument. And now, okay, option 1 was this, option 2 was this. Okay, so I realize I don't need a string interpolation at all. And this is already a string, right? So, okay, I don't need that. So since this is already a string, if I encapsulate one of the variables with curly braces, it means it will access to the value of this variable and just use inside the whole string. I guess now it should look as I expect, yes.